Everyone knows the story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, a beautiful princess, an evil queen, a poisoned apple, and a prince's kiss that saves the day. Thanks to Disney, it's one of the most famous fairy tales of all time. But what if I told you the real story isn't so magical? In this video I will show you the shocking truth of Snow White no one knows about. The original version of Snow White, written by the Brothers Grimm in 1812, was much darker. It had murder attempts, a heart-eating queen, and a punishment so cruel it would never make it into a Disney movie. And that's not even the most shocking part. Some researchers believe Snow White was based on a real person. A young girl, possibly a German countess, who died under mysterious circumstances. This story has been changed and softened over time, but the truth is still there if you know where to look. In this deep dive, we'll uncover the dark history behind Snow White, explore its real-life connections, and see just how much the story has changed. After this, you might never look at Snow White the same way again. The story of Snow White has been around for centuries, but it wasn't always the version we know today. The first written version comes from the Brothers Grimm, who published it in their 1812 collection of German fairy tales. Many believe Snow White was inspired by real-life events. One popular theory suggests that the story was based on Margaretha von Waldeck, a German countess from the 16th century. Margaretha was known for her beauty and lived in a region where children were forced to work in mines, possibly inspiring the idea of the Seven Dwarfs. Another theory links Snow White to Maria Sophia von Erthal, a Bavarian noblewoman from the 18th century. Her stepmother was reportedly cruel, and a famous mirror from her castle still exists today, possibly the inspiration for the Queen's magic mirror. While we may never know the full truth, it's clear Snow White wasn't just a random fairy tale. It has deep historical roots, making its dark origins even more chilling. The Snow White we know today is a sweet, innocent tale, but the original version by the Brothers Grimm was much darker. It wasn't just about jealousy, it was a horror story filled with murder attempts, deception, and brutal revenge. In the Disney version, the evil queen is Snow White's stepmother, but in the original Grimm story she was actually her real mother. That makes her jealousy even more twisted. She wasn't just an evil step-parent, but a mother willing to kill her own daughter to stay the fairest of them all. The queen was obsessed with beauty and couldn't stand the idea of Snow White surpassing her. So she ordered a huntsman to take Snow White into the forest, kill her, and bring back her lungs and liver as proof. Even worse, she planned to eat them, believing they would make her more beautiful. This gruesome detail was later removed in the sanitized versions of the story. Disney makes it seem like the poisoned apple was the queen's only attempt to kill Snow White. But in the original tale, she tried multiple times. First, she disguised herself as a peddler woman and gave Snow White a corset, which she laced up so tightly that Snow White couldn't breathe and passed out. The dwarfs later found her and loosened the laces, saving her life. Next, the queen came back with a poisoned comb. When Snow White used it, she immediately fell unconscious. Again, the dwarfs arrived just in time and removed the comb, bringing her back to life. It wasn't until the third attempt with the poisoned apple that the queen finally succeeded, at least for a while. One of the most disturbing parts of the original story is the queen's desire to eat Snow White's organs. In the Grimm version, after the huntsman fails to kill Snow White, he tricks the queen by bringing back the lungs and liver of a wild boar instead. Believing them to be Snow White's, the queen cooks and eats them. This shocking detail was completely removed in modern versions. But it shows how dark the original fairy tale really was, far from the innocent children's story we know today. While the Brothers Grimm made Snow White famous, versions of this story exist in different cultures around the world. One of the earliest known versions of Snow White comes from Italy. A 17th century tale called The Young Slave was written by Giambattista Basile, a storyteller who also wrote an early version of Cinderella. In this version, a noblewoman wishes for a child and magically conceives a daughter. However, when the girl turns 7, she falls into a deep sleep after breaking a magical ring. Instead of being hidden away in the forest, she is locked in a chest and forgotten for years. When she is finally found, she is treated as a servant, hence the title The Young Slave. The story ends with revenge against her cruel stepmother, just like in later versions of Snow White. Over the years, Snow White has gone through major changes, especially when it was adapted for modern audiences. The most well-known version is, of course, Disney's 1937 animated film, but even that film made massive changes to remove the darker parts of the story. When Walt Disney decided to turn Snow White into his first-ever animated feature film, he knew it needed to be more family-friendly. The result was a movie that softened the original fairy tale and removed many of its disturbing details. One of the biggest changes was the portrayal of the evil queen. In Disney's version, she is still cruel and jealous, but she is not Snow White's biological mother. This helped make the story less uncomfortable for audiences, as a mother trying to kill her own daughter would have been too disturbing for a children's movie. The multiple murder attempts were also removed. Instead of trying to strangle Snow White with laces or poison her with a comb, the queen goes straight to the poisoned apple, and perhaps the biggest change of all, the horrifying ending where the queen is forced to dance in red-hot iron shoes until she dies, was completely removed. Instead, she simply falls off a cliff, making her punishment far less gruesome. The story of Snow White has transformed over the centuries, but its dark origins still linger beneath the surface. What started as a chilling tale of jealousy, attempted murder, and even cannibalism has been reshaped into a family-friendly fairy tale. Yet when we look closely at its past, we see a story far more disturbing than what Disney gave us. From the Brothers Grimm's version, where a mother wants to eat her daughter's lungs and liver, to the real-life inspirations behind Snow White, this fairy tale has always carried an eerie weight. No matter how many times Snow White is retold, its core themes, beauty, jealousy, and survival, remain the same. In recent years, Snow White has been reimagined in several ways, some well-received, others highly controversial. One of the most famous modern retellings was Snow White and the Huntsman, 2012, which took a darker and more action-packed approach. Instead of waiting for a prince to save her, Snow White becomes a warrior who fights back against the evil queen. However, the upcoming live-action Snow White remake by Disney, set for release in 2025, has already caused a lot of debate. Many fans were upset by reports that the film would remove key elements of the original story, including the Seven Dwarfs, who were replaced with magical creatures to avoid stereotypes. Others were frustrated by statements from the lead actress, Rachel Zegler, who described Snow White as not waiting for a prince, and criticized aspects of the original story. These changes sparked backlash, with many arguing that the film was drifting too far from what made Snow White special in the first place. Others defended the updates, saying that fairy tales should evolve with modern times. Regardless of the controversy, one thing is clear. Snow White has changed dramatically from its dark and eerie origins, and it continues to be reimagined for every new generation. The story of Snow White has transformed over the centuries, but its dark origins still linger beneath the surface. What started as a chilling tale of jealousy, attempted murder, and even cannibalism has been reshaped into a family-friendly fairy tale. Yet, when we look closely at its past, we see a story far more disturbing than what Disney gave us. From the Brothers Grimm's version, where a mother wants to eat her daughter's lungs and liver, to the real-life inspirations behind Snow White, this fairy tale has always carried an eerie weight. The fact that multiple cultures have their own versions of the story suggests it touches on something deeply human, the fear of envy, betrayal, and death. Even today, Snow White continues to evolve. While Disney made it a symbol of childhood innocence, modern adaptations have tried to give Snow White more agency, turning her into a warrior, or rewriting her story altogether. Some welcome these changes, while others argue that they erase what made the original story timeless. No matter how many times Snow White is retold, its core themes, beauty, jealousy, and survival, remain the same. And now that you know the shocking truth behind it, the next time you hear "Mirror, Mirror on the Wall," you might just remember the terrifying history lurking beneath this classic tale. Let me know what you think of this in the comments below.